Let's
Absolutely.
let's do
I've
this.
been I've been siphoning mimosas since early morning since we got the snow day call at 6 p.m. last night.
Yeah. So this is gonna be
Mimosas
a
in a jar. Let's
That
go.
well, it's a fancy jar that my friend
Yeah.
designed. You can sort of see that's me repping the Latvian. It's based off of a Latvian design, but that also may be why it took me 2 hours to clear the rest of the snow.
okay. So for everyone listening to this podcast, you don't know what we are talking about. This is the 2 month review weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter at the University of Rochester. We take a book or two, we talk about them, we break it down, we have a good time. This season, we are right now doing James by Percival Everett. We have this week on James, and then next week, we're going through part two today. And then we're going to switch to Kathy Ecker's Empire of the Senseless, which we'll talk about more at the end. I'm Chad Poster of Open Letter Books, joined by a very tipsy Kaya Straumanis, who
Lies.
has been on a snow day in Wisconsin with 8 inches of snow and a big old bottle of champagne mimosa time. So, how you doing, Kaya?
I'm doing well. I am also extending the celebration of the pub date of the first of the three translator triptych books from Latvia this month. So, the book I translated officially hit stores yesterday, The River by Laura Vinogradova, and the next two are coming up. So, it was the perfect. I saw an opportunity and I seized it. I was just going to do one glass of wine. And then, like I said, got that call at 6 p.m. And I was like, let's just make the whole next day about it.
Well, so I am wearing a Latvia t-shirt. If you're watching, you can see, but if not, in support of your triptych. So there's three books coming out over the next 3 weeks, all from Latvia, which makes the total of fiction works translated from Latvia over the past 20 years jump from 5 to 8. So you've now, and counting the other book that you translated for Open Letter, High Tide by Inga Abela, Open Letter represents one half of all Latvian literature fiction in translation. Kicking ass. Brian Wood,
Yep.
here as always, author of
I
Joytime Killbox.
I have nothing Latvian. I don't even know if it's even a country. Haven't heard of it.
So,
Couldn't point it on a map. I'm
Have you
going off
seen
of
Brian,
the.
Flow?
you're gonna save my ass. You're gonna save my ass, Brian. I got in a debate about this yesterday, and
Okay.
I have nobody backed me up. Where's Doctor Doom from?
It's a made-up country. It's not actually
Right,
Latvia.
but what is it?
I want to say like Latvonia. It's like
God,
really close.
Latveria. God
Oh, so
damn it!
close. Okay.
I was like, there's no way you can't like that doesn't like automatically trigger like a Latvia connection in some
Yeah,
way.
it,
But
it has to be.
nobody, not a single person was like, I have no idea where Doctor Doom's from. It's like, dude, it's Latveria.
Still points to Brian.
Nerd.
That was a valiant
That was
effort.
close. That was close.
Absolutely.
It's like the
So,
made up. It's like the made up country for Ultron, right? It's like whatever. You're just trying to be an
Sokovia,
East. It's just some Eastern Bloc country. We know what this. Everybody's wearing a tracksuit, and it's really gray there. I get it.
you
You
didn't
slap an IA at the end of it, and it just makes
you,
it's part of the block.
Yeah,
don't spend most of your days
It's X block.
contemplating the Sokovia Accords.
yeah.
I've got this. I've got the MCU on lock if it's pre 2018.
I don't know. After the address by the president last night, Sokovia sounds pretty good to me. I'm on board. Let's go.
Right.
We can't even. So, but just to do a little bit of housekeeping and pitch some books. So you can buy all three books that are part of the translator's triptych that Kaya curated. One of which she translated, one of which her mentee translated, and a third one was translated by a friend and very talented translator. All three of those are available on our website under the Latvian triptych. You can find them all three for $30, one good price. Also, we got a book on Zelensky. He seems to be in the news a little bit right now. That's coming out in June called VZ. That's about his transformation from a comedian, an actor, into a politician who is widely panned, and then into like a superstar at the start of this war, and still strong as nails to stand up to those motherfuckers in the White House, but or at least
Absolutely.
not back down. But he's in the news. Buy that book too. Pre-order it. It'll be out soon, and it is wild and interesting. So that's a little pitch for a bunch of open letter books. So there we go. But we're talking about James and this section, guys. Holy shit. You said last week, Kyle, that that was the most anxiety making section last week.
I
I think
did.
this is far more anxious and more
Really.
upsetting.
There's definitely there's definitely more upsetting. But I did not feel as anxious myself this time.
Really.
Yes.
Brian, what did you feel? What is your
I'm with Kaya on this one. This one felt like it moved at a faster clip and it was more kind of cinematic and climactic,
Yes.
and less kind of contemplative and uh, kick you in your stomach feeling.
it's so
I
yeah.
mean, still, obviously, still horrible as far as
Oh
what's
God.
happening in it.
Bro.
Um,
Yeah.
Let me quick recap. So last time we left, James had run away and stolen Emmett's book of songs of the minstrel show. He gets in the woods. He meets again. He meets Norman, who had been part of. Where's Norman from? Was he part of the band as well? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Because he was
Who
passing.
who's passing for White. They devise a plan that to get their families back and to get them out of slavery. That well, James comes up with a plan that Norman will pretend to be a white slave owner of James and sell him into slavery. James will then escape. He will meet up with Norman. Norman will then resell him into slavery. He will escape again until they have enough money to get save their families, to purchase the freedom of their families. This is a terrible idea, but
Yeah.
it is a very Huck Finn idea. Like it's very much out of that kind of like, here's the way we can do this. Let's come up with this elaborate plan. So they do sell him into slavery at a mill. And in this mill, like there is some severe abuse. And this is where it felt like very tense to me and anxious is the
Mm.
amount of like physical violence that takes place in there is pretty intense. And one of the slaves is very much like okay with things and not like as rebelling or as like ready to rebel. He escapes with a young girl whose name I blank out on. The young girl, he's going to try and save her because she's been being raped
Sammy,
repeatedly. What is it?
Sammy,
Sammy. Sammy, she's been being raped repeatedly and beaten as well. This is just part of the slave owners' principles. They then get caught basically by this mill owner. Comes at them. They jump into the river. They're getting shot at. There's a lot that we could talk about in that scene. Sammy then dies. They then try and break into a steamboat, probably the Fidelity, floating down the river full of conmen. They get inside. Norman's going to go figure out what's going on by pretending to be white again and passing and dressing up in someone else's clothes. They're in like a boiler room where there's a different slave who is complicated, who keeps feeding the engine with coal until the whole thing fucking explodes. And we're left at the end of this very somatic, like you say, very like middling, leading to the climax moment where James is in the water. Norman can't swim. He's on one side and Huck Finn is on the other, and they're both calling for help, and he doesn't know who to choose to save. The end of part
Um,
two.
that is not the part where I stopped reading at based on the page numbers, but that's okay. So
You
cool.
you you're
Spoilers.
you're supposed to read all the way through part two. I may have screwed up the page numbers on our website, but
That's
part
okay. But I mean, wow, holy shit, what an ending.
so yeah, so that's where I said it's tense. Like to me, like the getting shot at, the death of a child, the like
Yes.
the fear of
Yeah.
like, here's our plan. I'm just gonna keep selling you into slavery and you're gonna keep escaping. Like people escaping from slavery doesn't seem super common within like the rest of this book. And we're gonna get away with it. And then like to have like a true like explosive tragedy and be left with
well,
like a choice like the Joker. It's like from the Dark Knight Returns.
yeah, it's like
You
an
can
O.
save
Henry.
these people or these people.
It's like a shitty O. Henry story.
It's like it's a train, isn't
The
it?
lady or the tiger, you know? Yeah.
The man or the bear.
Yeah.
So
The
that okay,
trolley
so
problem,
this
kind of.
is okay, so but this also just to explain why I was not as anxious about it and what Brian was saying that it moved at a fast clip and like a movie because to me I stopped at 244, which is right before chapter 9, which is where it ends with Norman saying just something's wrong. And that's the page number that I read to because I thought we had to
Oh.
read to that. And that's where I had my moment of like, wait, what? Like okay, we have like I don't have to wait until next week to find out what happens, but like what a place to end, I thought.
You literally
Um
didn't read the last three pages. That's it. So it's not like there's a whole huge thing that happens after that. But
yeah,
I'm sorry
And
for spoiling
it
for you,
all
Brian.
takes place off screen, basically,
Yeah.
or out of
yeah.
scene.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Um but yeah, wow. No, so I don't want to not talk about the parts that cause anxiety, but my sense of this, the visuals of them working at the or Jim being at the mill for like the 24 hours barely that he's there and being in this mud pit with the shitty saws and the tools and it's everything is run down seemed, and correct me if I because I don't remember, but this is the most possibly like the worst conditions, most degrading situation that we have been on the ground for in this book, right? Like
I think so.
actively, literally actively in it.
Yeah,
That's
like
my opinion as well.
he's sold to a monster. I
Yeah.
mean, really, like anybody that's going to buy another person's a monster, but there's let's just say it's a spectrum of monsters. This is on the really bad side of it, right?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Uh sexually assaulting a
A
child,
child, yeah.
right? A child, and then just beating someone just to beat them.
Yep.
Um, yay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
It's
the description of
disgusting.
the pain that he has, and that when they're trying to run, like feeling like the wounds kind of like ripping open on his back. The fact that like part of the abuse is that Henderson, the slave owner, is like, "It's time for your lashes, your daily lashes," and he's like, "Lashes?" He's like, "Got me a fucking back talker," and just starts beating
Yeah.
the shit out of him. Like we've had some violence, we've had lynching, we've had violence, we've had people get hit, but this one was like really like intense for me. It's also reading it on the stationary bike at the gym, which is like probably not the best circumstances. It's
Yeah.
like, wow, like this is, I'm in this like hoity-toity stupid gym with a pool and a hot tub, and I'm reading about like something that's like one of the most horrific moments in American history.
Yeah.
And one that
And it's
I will never be able to like fully understand in many ways.
yeah. And we, Chad, you and I got into it. Was what the saying off the pod last night a little bit and talking about this of, and I don't think I don't know. There's, I don't know if there is a way to get into it, but just like the levels of things that you and I and Brian cannot relate to and how to come to terms with, no, not come to terms is not even the right word, but how to address that of like, is there a need to try to relate or find some sort of because you can't find a common ground. You can't. And that's and I fucking hate that. I hate that this is the world and the country that we live in, and that even reading a work of fiction that still has historically accurate like I hate it. I hate everything and I hate the way that the world has come into existence.
Have you tried listening to Ben Shapiro? You'll feel a little bit better because he's like, facts about slavery. If you want to know about some facts about slavery, if you go to the African countries, if this, and this, this time, you'll see that the money the slaves were sold into. It's like, okay, I feel so much better now.
Yeah, the alleviation of like white guilt, like there's that reference early in the book to where it's like white people like to feel guilty, and like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
way in which like there is both like the sense of inherited generational guilt related, like even if like I don't think any of us, or none of our families were in a position that were slaveholders by any means. At least I know that mine weren't. Um, a
No,
family,
bro,
but
Latvians were serfs to Germans for a long time.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not the same, but like
and I
we've been kicked around a lot.
It
and
could be
Brian,
worse.
your
You
tragedy.
could be a Slav.
Yeah, yeah, could be a Ruski. But as part Native American, I know that your history, Brian, is much more towards the side of.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Yeah.
I identify as the oppressor. I'm white.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You sell your relatives into
Yeah,
slavery.
totally,
Like,
totally. The one thing I noticed in this piece, I like the way it sets up. It was a really good point you made, Kaya, about like we put him in like literally in a hole of like the darkest, worst place. And they get out of that and they get into another hole, right? And it's a place where you're using tools and doing work. And so we see it with the saw and we see it with the boiler room. Um, and what I find really interesting, and it runs through this entire section too, is this idea of metaphor. Um, it says, you know, dull tools are much more dangerous than sharp ones. I paused to admire his metaphor, but he
Hmm.
continued. right?
Hmm.
So this guy that buys him is like got a head full of rocks, and so he's very dangerous to be around. And then the saw blades, obviously they're dull, and so he's scared, as you know, scared to cut himself. But
Hmm.
with that metaphor, I kept finding parts where this is just extended over and over and over again. So like I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I think it's
Go
something we
for
could
it.
maybe discuss as
Go
we
for it.
kind of organically get there. But like if we go towards the end of this section in 239,
Hmm.
um, he says, "There are no windows down here," I said. "How do you know when it's daytime or nighttime?
Yep.
Doesn't matter. The fire is hot and the wheel turns. One bell, I open the valve. Two bells, two valves. Four bells, I close these and open this and put all the steam to the wheel. That's what makes us go." And so if you think of metaphor previously with dull tools and dull people in the job, and then I'm just down here making the machine turn. Don't you want to leave? No, I want to be down here making the machine. Like, all right, like you can hit me over the head. I get it. Like,
Yeah.
but we get two like very distinct, powerful metaphors in
Yeah.
these working conditions.
Yeah. The fact that he is like the engine for this ship to move, essentially.
Hmm.
Like without him, I think it was interesting in that section where I don't remember if he has a name, but where the guy that's shoveling in all the stuff keeps referring to Master Corey
Is it
and who
Brock
whatever his
or
name was,
it is Brock? Yeah.
but they're basically like, "Do you even know who your owner is?" He's like, not gonna answer. They're like, "If you see him, how do you know anything?" And they're like, "There's
Yes.
food, and that's it."
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
fucked up, dude. That was also like anxious, making like there may be no person. They're just like, "Here's our engine. You are just our motor. You're my
But that
battery,
also,
motherfucker," sort of
you're
vibe.
my battery.
Rick and Morty
Nice
shout out.
Rick and Morty reference. But that's one thing I wanted to look at or talk about is this the idea of it's it's no longer the idea of ownership, it's the idea of master. And even in the play where Norman is getting dressed in the clothes and Jim's like, you know, you don't want like the man upstairs. And is it Norman who's like, who, God? And Jim's like,
Yeah,
no, like the white people upstairs. Like who is the ultimate, who and what makes a master? And then this idea of like, you have this total shitbag who runs the sawmill and who is a truly bad person. That's a type of master. And then you have the types of masters like Daniel Emmett, who are like, who present as fair and equal. But the second something doesn't go their way, Norman is like, he lost his mind and
yeah,
was acting like the most slave owner I've ever seen. And Jim's like, well, I called that. Something didn't feel right. Um, and then you have the like Jim gets into it with Norman. He's like, I don't even think this Master Corey's real. Like this is a non-existent master. This
mhm,
guy doesn't even know. Like he serves a purpose, but he gets fulfillment from that in this questionable way, I suppose. But like there might not even be a master anymore. Like who somebody knows that he's down there and brings him food, but like he's he is working under these auspices of fear and obligation for someone who might literally not exist.
yeah.
And that's messed up.
Well, for me, I was really uncomfortable with it because, like, when I'm thinking about extended metaphor and what he's actually saying in this, if we like dig into the metaphor of it, I wonder if Percival is questioning Black culture. Like, what is Black culture? Because if you go to like 237, right at the bottom of it, keep it going, Brock said. Keep it up. You got it long enough and you'll get used to it. You'll start to like it. Do you like it? I asked. I like it, he said. It's for my massa. Why? Uh, why do you say master like that when you're talking to me?
Hmm.
That's how you're supposed to say it. He stared at me. Don't you think I don't know that something's going on? What do you think is going on? I asked. Something. But like, so like this idea of like, dude, it's just me and you. Like, it's just me and you down here. You don't have to talk like that. Like, there's nobody around. And he's like,
Yeah.
no, that's how you say it.
That's how
And
deep that stuff
I think
goes.
I think a
Yeah.
lot of this part trying to to frame how the three parts might work. And this isn't like a full coherent statement, but I think that the second part has a little bit of the like, are you? So there's all the thing about Norman passing. There's the slave that's at the mill who's like basically like Henderson's a good man. That's what he does. He's okay. This guy doing that same thing
Yeah,
of
yeah.
like one option that you have is to like just go along with the system and like accept it in some ways. You're providing like the engine for this to keep moving, but like it's not even like they're avoiding punishment so much as being like that's what the lot is. I shovel coal. I sleep in between shovelings. I don't. This is what I do. And then is there another
The food
way?
just arrives. Cool.
Yeah, is there
Great.
another option
Yeah.
for a slave or for a black person at this time to interact with this horrific system. Like so over there, the like the out their nature of like disruption or of rebellion has been to like, pretend to be white and then escape. Like finally like he's writing, he's got his pencil.
Yeah.
So that's the most powerful thing that he can do is write about it. But there's still like no confrontation, right? Like, but it's
Yeah.
setting up then at the end where he's looking out into the river and on two corners there's Norman who is, also black, and then there's Huck. And who's he going to save? The white person that was like, ostensibly like acting as his master for a period of time and who's connected to like who owns James or, his fellow slave. And I wonder if like part of this isn't to set up that sort of dichotomy of like what do you do under these circumstances to like have any sort of like rebellion or to even not sort of rebellion, but just to like have some autonomy or like what's the best way to get by? What's the way? What's the only path? What's the path to life?
Yeah.
And I know the answer because I finished this book.
That's why you can talk so profoundly.
That's why I've been thinking a lot about why it's broken up into three parts. I read a different
Yeah.
book for my class this week that was broken up into three parts that made no fucking sense for it to be broken up into three parts, but I think this one kind of does.
Do we know, like in the, I don't know it off the top of my head, but like Uncle Tom's Cabin came out like 1850-ish, right? Like early 1850s,
I think that you're correct. I'll look
right?
as you talk.
And then when did the derogatory term Uncle Tom, when did that come out? I'm wondering. Um, but like
It does come out in 1852.
52. Okay. Because I feel like this section had a little bit of that trope to it. It's not that he liked what's like this weird person. It's not that he like liked his master, but it was just like I choose this. It was almost like destroyed and beaten down and given up, and it had like that shade to it when they're showing the different types of people that James is encountering. Um, and I'm just curious when was that like such a
So,
derogatory, like what's the
okay.
etymology of an Uncle Tom?
So I'm not sure that there's like more to this in the end because this is just the beginning of
Yeah.
of this article. Okay, so it's beginning of the 1900s, around like 1915, okay? But one
Okay.
of the times that shows up here is that it was first used in the epitaph in 1919 by Reverend George Alexander McGuire, a supporter of the radical black nationalist Marcus Garvey. Addressing the first convention of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, McGuire declared, "The Uncle Tom N-word has got to go, and its place must be taken by the new leader of the Negro race, not a black man with a white heart, but a black man with a black heart." In the event's opening parade, marchers held protest signs that hopefully proclaimed Uncle Tom's dead and buried.
Okay.
But then the idea that like the Uncle Tom is, yeah, like what you're saying, like
Yeah.
kowtowing to the white.
Well, like cinematically, like you think of like one of the best portrayals of it was probably Django Unchained with Samuel L. Jackson, and was it Mr. Candy or what was no, I forget
On my
who, but
list, I've not watched it, but I desperately
okay.
want to.
It's Leo DiCaprio's
Yeah.
character. But this character, it was like something strange. It was like robotic. It reminded me of like Morlocks,
Oh yeah. You mean the
right?
the the the
Like these like subterranean monsters that are just shoveling things, and like the person that's going through episodic adventures is like, hey, wake up, like get out of here. And they're like zombies. They're like brainwashed. It had that like nightmarish, like, slow down, must feed engine. And it's like the rivets are popping off, ping, ping, ping. And he's like, what, who's even up there? What's going on? Don't talk about massa don't stop saying it like that. Like, it was like this like Twilight Zone episode. It was really
Yeah,
strange. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Totally, totally agree. And that was unnerving. Like,
Which,
definitely
which
unnerving.
like it's not meant to be hilarious, but it hilariously ends with the whole fucking thing blowing up. Boom! And
It's
like people like, oh, here's a white lady's leg. Here's another dead body. Let's get that out of the like right. It's like this like kind of like over the top Chad's getting attacked by a cat.
Yes,
But
he
it's like
is.
this.
Well,
It's
I
this
I
like
finished.
over the top hyperbolic, like ridiculous climax.
yeah.
Like
Yeah, and
it's a yeah.
well, Chad was looking up the Uncle Tom stuff. I did finish those last 2.5 pages, but ending with Brock just like everything's silent and right before the big boom, Brock just going shit, and then
It's almost like a Bugs Bunny cartoon or like Steamboat Willie, but
Yeah.
turned upside down.
Even the name
yeah,
Brock, like that's such a great name for just like a like just like a thudding worker.
It's
Brock,
hmm
it's
shovel,
impossible for
Brock,
me not to
shovel.
associate that with Brock Purdy, which is also a very workmanlike name.
Hey, he's got an endorsement with John Deere tractors. How
How
perfect is that?
ideal. That man mows lawn. He gains yard. He's like the I do beach sort of vibe.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, yeah, in that section, that I mean, we sort of jumped past like a couple points, but I think that really does, like what you're saying, Brian, about the metaphor and the way that that laces through here is really important. The one other part that I really got stuck on, not stuck on, but like was very into is the part where they're running away and they start getting shot at, and they're like, dude, they're shooting at us, and he's like, why would they shoot at us? Like if we're dead, we're of no value to them, and they're like, dude, they fucking hate us, like they
Yeah.
hate us. And that's super, super, super intense as like, yeah, here, yeah, I mean, just says exactly that. And that's really intense. Like the fact that like one other point that needs to be made is that when James is quote unquote sold to Emmett, even though Emmett's like, it's not, I'm not buying you as a slave, I'm buying you for a singer, blah, blah, all that bullshit that he says, all that self-righteous white person justification. He's bought for $200, but then Norman sells him to Henderson for 350. So he gets a more money for that. But I also don't, honestly not sure like what the scope of money is at that time. But that seems like an inordinate amount of money. I also pointed this out last night when we were talking, and I just want to bring
like
this back.
I don't even have $15 in cash on me at any point in time. Like, how does this guy
Yeah.
have 350?
I mean, there's no credit cards at that moment. There's no debit.
Mm.
So like your cash is your cash, right? But in Huck Finn, Huck has like $6,000 that he and Tom have found at the end of Adventures of Tom Sawyer. That $6,000 is being held by the judge back in Hannibal or wherever they are. Missouri. And when they're initially in the first part of this, when they're talking, and he's like, Huck, how am I gonna get the money to be able to like, free my family? The solution's right fucking there, obviously. Like the money, if that money exists in this book, if this world is the same as that world, like that is the answer. But like we can't do that in fiction, obviously. Where it'd just be like, okay, let's just go back and take my money, and then that wouldn't make a novel. But like it is interesting, and I don't know if this will come back or not. But just to put a
You don't know, or you don't know.
it doesn't. I'm not gonna
I
I'll say
mean,
it doesn't.
my statement on the opposite side of that is that Huck is, regardless of what is going on, Huck is still a child, and for a child to in that state where he's terrified and he thinks his dad is coming after him and all of this, like the last thing he's going to think about is logical, like, oh, I have financial means to help you, my friend. like
I
like
mean,
his
just
plan is run. Like he's a scared kid.
that's the one difference between Huck Finn and the beginning part of this book is the one that we mentioned in the very first episode, where in Huck Finn, Huck asks Jim, he's like, have you ever had money? He's like, yeah, I did once. I got this money and I bought a horse, and the horse is like dies, and now I don't want money no more. I don't want money. Like that's it's no good. And in this, that doesn't. He says, "Did you ever have money?" He's like, "No, I've never had anything." Um, and so like the use of money maybe switches a little bit there. I don't know what that means, or if that means anything, or if that's even valuable. But given that Percival read the book so many times before writing this, according to his interview, it's not a coincidence, right? You
Right,
would
What's
just
the
right.
one
forget.
There's
that
going to be intent.
the one that people like that I think really probably clicked with him? And I'm starting to see kind of like the ghost, like the specter of it through this entire book is when I forget exactly why he says it, because it's been a hot minute since I've read Huck Finn, but when Huckleberry says, "Fine, I'll go to hell then."
Oh,
Right? They're trying to talk to
yeah.
him about God or something, and he's like,
Yep.
"Well, if that's God, then I'll go to hell."
Yep. That's
Which
in the
like
very beginning too.
that's an insane thing to put in a book in like within context, like an American piece of fiction to say like, "All right, I'll just go to hell."
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we see that like James is talking about like, were you born like I just showed like you got shipped to hell. I was born in hell. So you see hell throughout this. And again, like over and over and over again, it keeps ringing this idea of like God, no, there's no God. Like we're seeing that in every single section.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how this ends, but I feel like that's something that's being woven through uh the entire piece. Like I
Yeah.
mean, even like
For
on like
sure.
two on 225, right? Uh Sammy's dead. Do you believe in God? I asked. I suppose I do, he said. I don't.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
like we get it. We get it. Oh my God, Norman shouted. Oh Jesus, he kept muttering. Jesus had nothing to do with any of this, I said. Good or bad. Like, all right, we get it. You don't believe in God.
And
Like
that's why
he's really
he
like he
dreams of
keeps
like
ringing,
Voltaire.
yeah, like he keeps ringing this bell, like, and it's the hallmark of modernism. We don't need God anymore. We can better ourselves through our intellect and through self, like understanding ourselves, and through science. We can, until we drop a bomb on Japan, it's going to be fine. We'll be okay with that.
Yeah.
But like I get it. Like it's all through this. But it made me think about that Huck Finn line. Like, then I'll just go to I choose hell.
Yeah.
And
So
so I think it makes like when he sees the two of them drowning, you'll be all right, Norman. You believe in God.
see, who do you think he's gonna save?
Brian.
Well, I think you should save the child, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I think neither, so seems pretty clear, neither of them can swim. And I would also save the child, but also bank on the fact that if there is anybody else helping pull people out of the water because Norman is passing it as white or can pass as white, like whichever choice Jim makes, the other one will be fine because it's by all appearances, a white person drowning. Everyone dies. This is the last chapter.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, Huck actually dies, and so all of the rest of Huckleberry Finn was wrong. That end part is just a fever dream. As it was a Jacob's ladder.
Jacob.
There's no final adventure with Tom Sawyer in the haunted house or whatever. Sorry.
There's a sudden whirlpool, or one of them gets caught on a catfish trap line, and then they're all fine. I don't know.
Well,
I
well,
mean,
while him and Norman are slapping his corpse on the on the shore of the mighty Mississippi.
oh my God.
Uh,
Yeah.
that's like a I think you should leave sketch.
Oh God.
And then it turns into like a weekend at Bernie's. He'll be all right. Nobody will know. It'll pass. Watch. Dress him up like a lady. No one expects him to talk. It'll be fine. It's just a dead, rotting corpse of Huckleberry Finn for the rest of the. Oh
bring,
God,
bring him
we're,
up, just dragging him along.
we're off the rails again.
Oh, that would be very dark.
There
No
was a
spoilers.
the other thing that I was thinking about, and I don't know if he's in conversation with it or not, but I watched the entire uh, Charlie Rose, Toni Morrison interview,
Oh, really?
um, where I think it was when she did the introduction to Huckleberry Finn, and they were
Okay.
discussing that. And so I watched the whole thing. And there's like one like very like, I mean, good Lord, like she says a lot of poignant things, so it's hard to keep track and keep up. But one that really stood out with me is she said white people have a big problem. And she laid it out like this, like if someone has to be on their knees for you to feel big, you've got a big problem, right? And so that's not for me to deal with, that's for you to deal with.
Yeah.
And this section made me think about that a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if Everett had that in the back of his mind or if it's just like, oh, I can write this, no problem. I got this. But
Baked in.
it really made me think, like I had to suffer through, like, I don't know if you like Charlie Rose interviews, but I hate him.
Yeah.
And
No.
so, but somehow he would get all the really good authors, and, and,
It's the
and, uh,
only show.
and I know, and record them. So you got to suffer through it sometimes when you want to do some research. But that one really jumped out at me. And this section, I thought it really resonated well.
I I did have like a funny part. So the book does a good job, I think, of balancing a little bit of like the horror with the levity,
For
Yeah.
sure.
to certain degrees. And part of the I think what's funny is when they meet the guy McCart who's like at the town that they first get to, who directs them to Henderson to sell James. And McCart's basically like, "Well, I'm the sheriff," and or what does he call himself? A constable?
Constable.
Constable.
Constable,
We fancy
Constable
ourselves a
McCart.
village.
And they're like, uh, he's Norman's trying to say like James is, dumb but like strong. He won't wear his shoes. He refuses to wear his shoes. Dumb, McCart said. They're all dumb. Simple. That's a better word. Simple. This here little Hamlet is simple, but I don't mean it the same way. Norman nodded. I like thinking about words like that. I'm also the school teacher. And he's like, I see. Well, I am the postmaster. You're just like, who the fuck is this? Like, this one dude doing
It's
all
like
this
it's
stuff
like a
for
Mel
some
Brooks
town.
sketch or
Yeah,
something,
it's
right?
like Blazing Saddles. Like,
Yeah. They go to a bakery and the guy's there. He has a baker hat on. All of a sudden, I'm also a
Mhm.
baker. Like, oh God, not him again. Like, yeah.
It's for all the Severance fans. It's that crazy doctor from the most recent episode, but uh, it's doing the same thing. I don't know. Is there anything else you guys want to hit on in this section before we sort of wrap up?
I will say I was a little surprised. So after they met the constable slash postmaster slash school teacher, and he was like basically like, "Oh, jeepers, like is it hard to be a slave owner? Like, I don't know. Like it seems like a lot to do and a lot to take care of, and I don't have a
Right.
lot of time on my hands." Where for a little tiny bit, I thought this town, like their scheme might actually work because if everyone else in this village is just as like, oof, we've heard stories, but it doesn't really sound like it's for us, that it might have been, but it was just immediate 180 degrees. And from a reader perspective, I was not expecting it to be that gruesome and disgusting immediately.
Yeah. There's one other part that I think is interesting that ties into a lot of what we've been talking about is on 195. Um, when they're walking into that town more or less, and they see this old woman churning butter. The old woman churning butter stared at us as if with some knowledge. Sorry, the old woman churning butter stared at us as with some knowledge, and I kicked myself for falling into the trap the slavers would have set for me to think that there was magic in that old black woman. And that's interesting too in relation to what we're saying about the relationship to both like the system and like what you're internalizing, and like a lot of that, like even that Brock has internalized the mechanistic nature of like slave work. You do this that keeps it going. The I think it's Luke has internalized that the master is right and like he's a good guy because he's not as bad as he could be. He could be a lot
Yeah.
worse, therefore he's good. Like that internalization, and then the idea of like this, like the songs, all the minstrel songs being like, it's all good. We're gonna get to heaven, and that's come up like you said, Brian, where he's like, they say like once we die, we're gonna go to heaven, and that's where our salvation is. And he's like, but if white people are there, it's just gonna be the same shit all over again. Like there's
I'll,
like that.
I'll, it's like Huck. I choose hell.
Yeah, I choose
Mhm.
hell. Like I don't
Yeah.
want that. Give me limbo all day. Um, but there's that things that are being built from like the system and from the outside. And it's I mean it's I found it very this is a very moving section to me.
Hmm.
And like it might be a little bit in retrospect, but I think that it's a powerful one for like setting up a certain like what do you do now? Like what should James do? Not just with saving someone, but what do you do?
And there's a lot of it on same on page 195 at the bottom. He's saying, bad as whites were, they had no monopoly on duplicity, dishonesty, or perfidy, where he's starting to second guess everyone around him. The you're not even able to trust your own.
He refers to this the having himself sold over and over again into slavery as his own confidence scheme. So
I've been trying to find that this entire time. Yeah, just because it was
boom.
confidence. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Grifter's gonna grift.
Grifter's gonna
Grifter's
grift
gonna
all
grift.
day.
Yeah.
All day. So yeah, it's on page 213 at the bottom.
Hmm.
Uh
213. Thank you. Then
I
I
mean
can finally set
it
my
is
mind at ease.
that's actually a really interesting section too, where he's like I didn't watch. I waited, watched. I didn't want to leave Sammy alone for too long. I needed to see Norman walking out of that town toward me. I wondered if I had been right in my fleeting moments of distrust of him. I wondered again if he was even black at all. Maybe he was just some crazy white guy who had just sold me. But the plan to sell me had been my idea, unless, of course, that was such an obvious confidence scheme that he merely waited for me to come up with it. I kicked myself for being a fool as I wended my way back through the forest to young Sammy. Like, that's another one of these things that's built in of like, do we trust each other? Like they
Mhm.
don't like he's being taught over and over again in this section not to even trust. Like we had at the beginning where it's like, oh well, we can actually speak normal. We just speak this bullshit way for the white people. And there's like a sense of solidarity in a lot of the first part. And in this one, it becomes a lot of like, ooh, wait, I can't
Well,
trust everyone.
and you see that played out with Brock because he says some people don't mind being slaves. I don't know if we can trust them.
Same thing with Luke. And that was
Yeah.
like that's where
Yeah.
that starts coming in. Like, and then he's like,
Mhm.
do I really trust Norman? Like
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
can I trust? Like, what a alienating and horrible system that like does separate, makes everything very questionable, creates like a sense of paranoia, obviously, because that's easier to control people with. Like it's
Hmm.
very fucking dark. And like as much as you can be like sympathetic towards it or like see parallels in one's own life, like there's reasons that to be paranoid right now under any number of circumstances, regardless of
Yeah.
race or anything. But like this is a whole different game. Like to for a system to have been, I'm like skirting Trump's DEI bullshit and like anti woke fucking stuff. But like there is the like you do need to remember that this is like a system that has truly fucked like a whole group of human beings for a very significant way that for generations will always be there. And like as much as we like want to sympathize or understand or do things, like we're kind of incapable. Like you can't go back
Yeah.
and fix like this much like built-in abuse of economic status, of like just built-in like fears and prejudices that have been like just woven into the very fabric of
I'm
society.
pretty sure the machine's fine if you just keep feeding it, Chad. Why don't you just shut up and keep feeding it? Okay.
Shut up and shovel.
You
Yeah.
know what? I would shovel the shit out of some coal if it would blow everything up. I would do that.
This is true. Hey,
Hook me up. Give me a
that's one thing
shovel.
that we didn't touch on is that right before everything goes boom, the word comes down that the war is starting.
Okay, I couldn't remember
Yep.
that comes. Sorry, I was wondering where that part was. So yeah, so the Civil War is breaking out.
And it's blowing it all up.
Everything's blowing up. What are
Yeah.
you gonna do? What are you gonna do about
What
it?
what are you gonna do
Mm,
about
metaphor.
Who's how
it?
when things are in flux. This is like a Kathy Acker moment though too. Is like her whole bit is like loving shit that's in flux. Like everything
Break it.
that's like in that place that's being broken, that's being like recrafted, that's being put together. Like so we're at that moment. I guess the your metaphor is right there. The boat's exploded, the war is starting. He's got to choose what's he gonna do. Any guesses? Anyone have anything that you want to throw out there as like a potential ending to this book?
How it's going to end?
Yeah.
Uh, my guess is it has to do something with writing.
Okay.
And then there's got to be some revelation that he gives Huck, I would guess.
And then he what's that? What was the last part?
Some revelation with Huck's parentage, and then something about writing and
Okay.
it'll be something about naming himself. Um, he's toyed around with some names beforehand, and we need to revisit the philosophers as well, I would assume. So those will be my three guesses.
More Voltaire, more John Locke.
Yeah.
Kaya?
Yeah. Um, I have no guesses.
Oh, come on.
I mean, other than the things. Okay, okay, fine. I'll take a wild swing. Is that Jim has been writing this entire thing the entire time? None of it happened.
None of it happened. Oh, okay.
None of it
James
happened.
James stands on the mighty banks of the Mississippi and says, I feel so good now that I have my family. In fact, I feel like a king. I will have my last name be King. And I kind of think the Bible is real. And Martin Luther was really good as far as like bucking the system with his theses. So I will rename my son Martin King.
Yep. I mean, there is so if this is
And
like if this is one part of
Theme.
I
Black
think
American
that's literally an
history.
episode of Quantum Leap with
Oh
Scott
my
Bakula,
God.
by the way.
Seriously?
I'm not even kidding. That's literally an episode of Quantum Leap.
Oh my God. Oh my God. So if
If you
this is
watch
one,
TV in the 90s, you'll know what that is.
so there are like all those kind of like philosophers or like thinkers, social thinkers of like the African American experience, the Booker T. Washingtons, the W.D. Du Bois, all that kind of stuff of like different options. And what you just pointed to unintentionally through Quantum Leap is that whole like Malcolm X versus MLK Jr. sort of divide as well.
Any means
Like
necessary, or yeah,
or within the
the
and
way
all of, I think all of that comes to play throughout this whole book in subtle
perfectly.
ways. And I think that that's really maybe like in some regards like that may be like his real true gift with this is to have some of those ideas in here without naming them and without having to like beat you over the head with them. They're just sort of like woven through in subtle ways of like watching Brock and whatnot and like how people interact and like what that is. I think that's pretty genius for to pull off without it feeling pedantic. This book does not feel pedantic to me.
Not at all.
Brian, you have a favorite line?
Yeah, I'll do this for my favorite line. We'll extend our metaphor. It's on page 239. Um, I looked at the giant boiler, dark gray and black, with soot and red with rust. I rubbed the sweat off my face and observed the soot on my hand. You breathe this in all the time? I asked. There's nothing wrong down here. I breathe just fine.
I'll do mine, Kaya, just so you don't steal it. 219. We don't even know where we are, Norman said. Bound to be a slave state on the other side of the river. Probably, I said. We're slaves, Norman. Where we are is where we are.
Yeah. Mine's on 201. We're at the bottom of 201. So the big store clerk or woman says, "Take a tater or take a biscuit," she said. "Tater or biscuit? I don't care which one. Give me that penny." Norman tossed a glance my way. He was asking which one, but the giant white woman was staring at me. He moved his hand toward a biscuit, but before he touched it, the churning old woman sneezed. The giant cut the slave a hard look that bounced harmlessly off. "I'll take a tater," Norman said.
I think like going back to that old woman churning butter having like magical powers. She's like, that shit's poison.
Yeah, well, don't we like
Don't take
pages
it.
pages on where Jim comes back for Sammy and Norman's there. He's like, "I went into town to get provisions," and they're eating the biscuits, and he's like, "You're gonna want some of like you're gonna want some this other stuff to go with it because the biscuits are super dry." And I assume that the woman churning the butter was just like, "You're way better off with the raw potato than you are with anything that this lady bakes."
Oh, okay, so for next week, we will finish this book. We are planning on doing this podcast next week, but as a bit of a warning, I am going to be in Delhi for an editorial trip sponsored by the great people at SALT at the University of Chicago. And I'm hoping that everything will work. I hope that the Wi-Fi will make this possible. And I hope that I can understand what a 10 and a half hour time difference is. And what time we'd be doing anything. Like that feels like tough math for me.
It's the half hour that gets you.
It always does, man. Like I can figure out war, but half an hour, give me a break. Like I can't get there. So, anyways, I don't know if there's anything you want to add. I do want to say that if you follow the Mining the Delkey Archive podcast, which is you can subscribe to on Apple and on Spotify, or through the Substack called Mining the Delkey Archive, there was an episode that went up today that has a conversation between myself, Tom Flynn, and Vincent Franconi about The Third Policeman by Flann O'Brien, which also is a band stuck in hell. It's a guy stuck in hell, returning. It's a very dark book in which, like, you go through a lot of sequences and you just start over in hell. You start over in hell doing the same thing. You never escape. Just keeps going and going and going. And that also includes, if people are interested, it includes like a little bit of the story about how that book ended up on Lost and became like a huge phenomenon. So if you're interested, check that out. That's worthwhile. Buy Kaya's triptych. Support Ukraine. Uh,
Absolutely.
I think that's it for this week.
That's the important stuff. Bye, guys. Good to see you.